I found the telegram the way I find most inconvenient truths, by buying the wrong thing and refusing to throw it away. It was folded into the back cover of a damp radio logbook, stamped Benghazi, and dated February 6, 1941. And it wasn't meant for me at all. Captain Ettore Salvi had sent it to his wife back in Italy, as if a few official words could keep a marriage intact across a collapsing front. He kept it short, almost polite, except for one private detail someone later underlined with a shaky pencil. Little Mosque. He didn't explain who Sofia was, or why a wooden file box mattered more than a tank, only that Mario had turned north when everyone else was running south, and that the papers had to stay out of the marshal's hands. The bottom line with the grid reference is torn clean off, like the desert took its fee, so this morning I booked the earliest train to Rome to ask the military archive for the missing page before the day has time to cool. On February the 6th, 1941, at 5:12 p.m., Brigadier Mario Algeri lay in a shallow drainage cut beside the Libyan coastal highway near Beda Fomm, staring at a British roadblock that had no walls and did not need them. A white dome, locals called it the Little Mosque, glared in the low sun, and a low sand ridge behind it hid the gun barrels that mattered. 30 yards behind Mario, his M13/40 tank idled unevenly, its right track held together by wire and a battered spare link. In his boot, a corner of a wooden file box pressed against his ankle with every breath. He had taken that box from his own war marshal, and the only way to keep it from vanishing was to keep moving toward the place everyone else was fleeing. A British cruiser tank eased up the ridge, showed a slice of turret, and slid back down as if testing the air. Mario counted the long barrel, the stance, the speed of the maneuver, and decided it was one of the fast models the British used to appear, strike, and disappear before a slow Italian turret could answer. He had no artillery, no infantry screen, and no radio contact he trusted. He had one damaged tank, 3 men, and a file box full of ink that could ruin careers. The result was a plan that existed only inside his skull. The cost was that if his skull cracked, nothing else would matter. Behind him, Neri kept the engine just above stall, because too much throttle would snap the repair wire, and too little would die at the worst moment. The gunner kept wiping sand from the sight housing, even though sand returned with every gust. Mario did not stop him. Small rituals were sometimes the only way men stayed functional in a retreat that had become a stampede. The result was a crew still holding shape. The cost was that shape depended on Mario's lies as much as on their steel. 2 nights earlier, Benghazi had still pretended to be a city. Mario had been walking alone near the market because he preferred to learn about a unit by watching its shadows. He heard drunken laughter and found black-shirted militia cornering a local woman in an alley mouth. They were not searching for enemy agents. They were taking advantage of retreat chaos and the fact that nobody punished them. Mario stepped into the lamplight, tapped his walking stick once on stone, and spoke about discipline in a tone that made even drunk men imagine paperwork. They backed away without swinging because a fight would create witnesses. The result was that the woman lived through the minute. The cost was that the militia left with Mario's name. Her name, after a pause that sounded like calculation, was Sofia. Mario offered to bring her to the civil office because regulations demanded it. She shook her head and said the men with keys wore different uniforms but used the same hands. Mario understood that proper channels would simply relocate her danger. He ordered her to follow him to his headquarters because the only space he could keep clean was the space under his command. The result was protection by proximity to rank. The cost was that he had turned her into an item that could be used against him. Mario cleared a cot in a corner of the command room and ordered water and bread delivered without questions. He also ordered his adjutant to move her name nowhere near the official roster. He listed her as a laundry runner attached to the quartermaster and wrote the entry in his own hand because his hand carried authority for now. The result was that she became paperwork camouflage. The cost was that if anyone examined the handwriting later, the lie would point to him like an arrow. In the hours that followed, Benghazi's harbor cranes stood like skeletons against a bruised sky, and rumors moved faster than trucks. An Australian division, men said, was close enough that rear guards could hear artillery by night, Mario did not need to see Australians to understand pressure from behind. He saw it in the way staff officers grabbed suitcases before they grabbed maps. The result was urgency infecting the city. The cost was that urgency made predators bolder, including the black shirts who had already decided Sofia was spoil. The staff map on Mario's wall showed the coastal highway stamped with an old name, Via Balbia, running southeast toward Ajdabia and beyond. The road was the only artery left for the 10th Army's retreat, and it narrowed into choke points where one wrecked truck could trap thousands. Patrol reports said British columns were cutting across the interior through places like Mazus and Antalat to reach the highway ahead, not behind. Mario traced the route with a fingernail and understood the geometry. The enemy did not need to win battles if it could arrive first. The result was fear sharpened into calculation. The cost was that calculation made him see his own command as a pawn. A summons arrived that afternoon, sealed in wax as if the desert could be civilized by stationery. The messenger wore a black shirt beneath his coat and a smile that did not reach his eyes. The note ordered Mario to the old villa that had once belonged to Marshal Balbo, now repurposed as a stage for men who still had carpets. Mario remembered hearing that Balbo had died the previous summer in friendly fire, and he found it fitting that his name still decorated roads and houses while living men were being erased. The result was a symbol turning sour. The cost was that symbols did not stop orders. Mario left Sofia behind with strict instructions. Stay out of sight, speak to no one, and if black shirts appeared, run to Salvi's radio tent, because Signal's officers were the one tribe still feared. He walked into the villa with only his pistol and his stick and a smile that was mostly bone. The result was compliance that preserved appearances. The cost was that leaving her behind made her reachable. War Marshal Vittorio Mancini greeted Mario in a room that smelled of roast meat and polished wood, while maps of the coast hung like theatre backdrops. Staff officers in clean collars discussed lines of communication, as if words could replace fuel. Mancini spoke about honor and Italy, then laughed at the idea that honor could stop British engines. He did not laugh alone. The men who laughed with him were the same men who signed ration cuts for the front. The result was clarity about who owned comfort. The cost was that clarity did nothing for Sofia. When Sofia was brought in, cleaned, dressed, held by the elbow, Mancini presented her as a protected asset that traveled with the highest authority. He did it loudly, because humiliation only worked when it spread. Mario asked to see the written order transferring a civilian into a personal convoy. Mancini did not produce paper. He said paper came later, when winners wrote it, and he added that a brigadier who worried about women while an army collapsed had misunderstood war. The result was that Sofia left with the marshal's entourage. The cost was that Mario's restraint became a debt he owed himself. That night, rain turned Benghazi's dirt into paste. Mario could have driven a tank into the villa gate and demanded Sofia back, and he would have been shot or celebrated depending on who survived to write it. Instead, he called Captain Ettore Salvi, his signal officer, and ordered him to lock away every radio log and fuel allocation list from the last 72 hours. Mario was not choosing a duel. He was choosing evidence. The result was a quieter war beginning inside the louder one. The cost was that once he began collecting proof, he could no longer pretend he had no intention to use it. When the retreat began, it did not move like a unit. It spilled. Trucks, guns, staff cars, ambulances, and carts jammed the highway in a single line, and Mario's tanks burned fuel just to keep their place. Salvi laid damp papers on Mario's field desk and pointed out the rot in pencil strokes. One withdrawal order issued twice with different times, fuel redirected to special convoy requirements, and an instruction for Mario's armored group to hold a designated grid to cover the passage of priority elements. Mario's unit name sat underlined as if already dead. The result was betrayal with timestamps. The cost was that timestamps demanded action before the road itself disappeared. At 1:40 a.m. south of Benghazi, Corps signals repeated a new order. Mario was to halt north of Ajdabia and establish a strongpoint while the main staff passed. The code groups were correct, which made the intent worse. A fixed rear guard was a gift to an enemy racing to cut the highway. Mario read the message, checked his map grid, and calculated the kill zone it described. Flat ground, visible from ridges, and dependent on mines he did not have. The result was a forecast of his own funeral. The cost was that disobeying would invite a different kind of execution. Mario asked Salvi how quickly headquarters could clarify the order. Salvi answered, with a look that said clarification depended on whose signature needed protection. Mario understood that bureaucracy did not punish power during collapse, it preserved it. If he wanted to change outcomes, he needed something the marshal could not dismiss with a laugh. The result was a new objective: seize proof in front of witnesses. The cost was that witnesses could also become accusers. Before sunrise, Grimaldi arrived with a squad of black shirts and a clipboard, claiming authority to inspect vehicles for deserters and stolen property. His men pried open crates and laughed at the soldiers who had nothing left to steal. They climbed onto Mario's tanks and ran fingers along the armor as if searching for hidden treasure. Grimaldi asked whether Mario had transported any unauthorized non-combatants. Mario answered that his column carried only men and machines, and he kept his voice calm enough to sound bored. The result was that Sofia remained suspicion rather than proof. The cost was that suspicion made Grimaldi hunt harder, and hunts in collapsing armies ended with corpses. Mario ordered Salvi to split the logs, originals sealed and hidden, copies left in places meant to be searched. He ordered his quartermaster to siphon fuel at night from abandoned vehicles, because official allocations had already been diverted. He also ordered mechanics to strip spare parts from wrecks the column passed, because a tank with a broken fan belt was a bunker. The result was enough petrol and metal for one more sprint. The cost was a new set of crimes, and crimes multiplied faster than rations. Sofia returned at dusk near a shallow wadi, hair matted with dust, wrists marked by rope. Mario's sentries raised rifles, unsure whether she was prisoner or bait. Mario stepped forward, lowered their barrels with a gesture, and watched Sofia's eyes move past him toward the radio tent. She said the marshal's special convoy carried papers meant to erase certain orders, and she said she had heard staff officers speak of meeting the British farther south to trade time for safety. She did not beg. She offered a small detail instead, a phrase used at checkpoints and the shape of the wax seal that opened doors. The result was a story that could be acted on. The cost was that it could also be a blade hidden in a tear. Salvi compared Sofia's phrase to the day's signal traffic and found a similar wording in a radiogram marked priority. It proved access, not a secret deal. Mario watched Salvi's pencil hover and realized another constraint. Many Italian tanks lacked proper radios, which meant whoever controlled the few working sets controlled reality. If Mancini's convoy held the best communications, then it could rewrite the retreat at will. The result was anger becoming strategic. The cost was that strategy required Mario to steal what he could not request. Mario measured the evidence like fuel, insufficient but enough to drive. He closed his pocket watch with a hard click and gathered the men he trusted. He did not ask for loyalty. He asked who would risk being shot by Italians in order to reach the marshal's convoy before the British cut the road. He showed them one sheet with his unit name underlined, and he kept the rest hidden because too much truth frightened men into paralysis. A corporal spat and said he preferred an honest death to a stupid one. The result was a small nucleus willing to move. The cost was that everyone left behind became a future witness against them. Mario made the paperwork lie. He sent a radiogram stating his unit had commenced southward displacement and was establishing the ordered strongpoint. The format and codes were perfect. The direction was not. He ordered Salvi to copy the message twice, one to hide, one to burn if blackshirts approached. The result was camouflage of ink. The cost was that if any staff officer compared grids with actual sightings, the lie would snap like wire. They moved at 2:20 a.m., lights dark, engines throttled low to keep dust down, Mario used compass bearings and landmark silhouettes, wadi lines, lone acacia trees, the faint rise of distant ridges, to keep from drifting too far off the packed shoulder. Twice he stopped to clear sand from track teeth because the repair wire threatened to snap. Once he had to order a truck pushed into a ditch because it blocked the lane, and its driver would not move fast enough. The result was stealth purchased with brutality. The cost was that brutality left him no moral room to claim innocence later. Near Antilat, one of Mario's tanks threw a track with a metallic scream and slewed sideways. Repairing it would take an hour they did not have, and every hour belonged to the British. Mario ordered the crew to strip the rare radio set and abandon the hull. 6 men walked into the dark, hoping to merge into the larger retreat before dawn. The result was speed preserved. The cost was 6 lives now dependent on luck instead of armor. As the sky paled, Mario saw a horizon of dust moving with purpose. A scout reported British vehicles cutting across from the interior toward the highway. Mario did not need formal names to understand what mattered. A small force at the right point could stop an army with sandbags and a wrecked truck. He did the arithmetic and felt urgency become physical. The result was commitment to a collision. The cost was that collision would happen on ground chosen by someone else. By noon on February 6th, the highway bent near low dunes and scattered scrub. The little mosque appeared, bright against brown, and the terrain offered every advantage to a force that could work ridges and radio. A lonely knoll, the pimple on some maps, overlooked the bend. And Mario saw a British observer vehicle parked just below its crest, antenna tilted like an accusing finger. He stopped behind a drainage cut and waited, because if he rushed, he would be shot before his own trap even closed. The result was patience forced by physics. The cost was that patience shortened his remaining margin. The marshal's convoy arrived fast. Staff cars, lorries, black-shirt escorts, and in a covered truck, Mario saw the outline of Sofia's head turn toward the light. He drove his damaged tank onto the road at an angle and stepped out with his stick raised, halting the lead vehicle. Engines revved. Drivers swore. Grimaldi jumped down, face flushed, and called Mario mad. Mario answered that he was conducting an emergency inspection under battlefield necessity, and he chose words that still sounded like law. The result was a pause in which rules pretended to exist. The cost was that pauses at Beda Fomm drew British guns. Mario demanded the file box of priority orders loud enough for staff to hear and controlled enough to sound sober. A major in a clean jacket stalled with a smile and said the convoy could not delay because enemy armor was near. Mario answered that enemy armor was exactly why he needed the papers, because papers explained why his tanks had been ordered to die. A sedan door opened. Mancini stepped out, boots too polished for sand, and looked at Mario as if looking at a dog that had forgotten its leash. The result was the confrontation Mario had been building. The cost was that it was now public and irreversible. Mancini asked whether Mario intended to obstruct the retreat of the 10th Army. Mario said he intended to prevent the retreat from becoming a slaughter arranged for the comfort of a few. A black-shirt moved his hand toward his weapon. Mario held posture and asked again for the papers, adding that he held copies of radiograms with altered times and fuel diversions. Staff eyes flicked between the marshal and the highway, calculating which man would still have power in an hour. The result was doubt inside the convoy. The cost was that doubt made nervous fingers tighten. A British cruiser tank crested the ridge and fired. The shells struck the road and threw up a fountain of stone, and the convoy's engines instantly changed tone from impatience to fear. A second tank showed itself farther left, using the ridge like a curtain. Mario's gunner swung the turret and fired a 47mm round at the first silhouette. The shot sparked harmlessly off armor and vanished into dust, teaching a lesson in 1 second. This was not a duel of equals. The result was reality asserted by steel. The cost was that Mario's men now knew how thin their hope was. The first Italian shot aimed at a human came from a nervous escort and snapped past Mario's shoulder. Mario smashed the man's rifle with his stick and shouted for weapons down. For 3 heartbeats, the convoy balanced on fear. Mancini barked an order to seize Mario for treason, and blackshirts surged. British fire intensified, and drivers began reversing into each other, folding the convoy into a knot. Mario lunged to the covered truck, tore back canvas and pulled Sofia down. He shoved her towards Salvi at the ditch line with the sealed logs and ordered Salvi to run south with the papers before the road closed. The result was the mission transferring from force to flight. The cost was that Mario could not run with it. A blackshirt sprinted towards Sofia with his weapon raised. Mario stepped between and fired once, dropping the man in the sand. The act bought seconds and crossed the final line. The result was a corridor long enough for Sofia and Salvi to move. The cost was that Mario had given Mancini the perfect label: murderer, rebel, convenient scapegoat. Mario ran back to his tank, snatched the file box from a clerk's arms and threw it into the hatch. A British shell tore through a lorry, and burning paper drifted in the air like black snow. Mario did not try to kill Mancini. Killing a man would not change the roadblock, and it would not reopen the highway. Time might. He slammed the hatch, ordered Neri forward, and drove towards the barricade. The result was motion becoming pressure. The cost was that his damaged tank became the obvious target. Mario fired at a wrecked lorry, anchoring the roadblock, and shattered its engine. The lorry slumped and a small gap opened as sandbags sagged. British guns answered, striking Mario's left running gear and jarring the hull. Steering became a fight, and the repair wire on the right track began to sing under strain. Mario ordered smoke and watched a thin white curtain bloom, and then thin again in the wind. The result was concealment measured in seconds. The cost was that seconds were all he had left. Behind him, the Italian column surged and then broke. Trucks tried to leave the road and sank, wheels spinning uselessly. Men abandoned vehicles and ran, because feet did not need fuel. A fuel truck caught fire and turned the afternoon into a wavering orange glare, making every silhouette visible. Mario could not count who escaped. He could only hear the sound of a formation dissolving. The result was that some men lived by scattering. The cost was that organized resistance died with the column's shape. Inside the tank, Mario opened the file box with shaking hands. Fuel diversion orders lay on top. A list of units to be held in place was underlined in red, and his unit name sat among them. A sealed envelope bore the wax mark Sofia had described. For a moment, he believed her story fully, and the belief made him colder, not warmer. The result was certainty. The cost was that certainty arrived too late to alter the shells falling. A loud hailer called for surrender in accented Italian. Mario did not answer. He rammed the tank through the sagging gap, scraped sandbags, and lurched over a shallow ditch. On the far side, the repaired track finally snapped. The hull slewed and stopped, half blocking the road, half exposed to the ridge. The result was a plug even in failure. The cost was that he could no longer move, and a stationary tank in that place was a coffin. Mario ordered Neri and the gunner out, and forced them to run with a threat to shoot the engine if they hesitated. They climbed through the rear hatch and disappeared into smoke, because smoke was the only cover left. Mario stayed and loaded the last armor-piercing round himself, hands slipping from sweat and soot. The result was that 2 men became runners instead of corpses. The cost was that Mario had accepted solitude as his only remaining protection. Before the next shell landed, Mario dragged the file box from the hatch and tried to decide what evidence was worth dying for. If the box fell into British hands intact, it would become an enemy trophy and nothing more. If it stayed with Mancini's staff, it would vanish into a furnace the moment the marshal reached safety. Mario tore open the sealed envelope and found routing slips and signatures that linked the priority elements directly to diverted fuel and altered grid times. He ripped out 2 pages, stuffed them inside his tunic against his skin, and shoved the rest back into the box. The result was that at least a fragment of proof moved with his body, not with a vehicle. The cost was that he had no secure place to carry paper in a burning tank, and he knew the desert would happily eat ink. A shell struck the rear, heat flooded the compartment, and ammunition began to cook off with popping cracks. Mario fired his last round blind into the ridgeline and felt the recoil as a pointless comfort. Then he forced the hatch open and crawled into the sand, beating out a burning sleeve with his bare hand. The result was survival beyond steel. The cost was pain that would not let go. When he lifted his head, he saw a British armoured car parked near the roadside. Next to it stood Sofia, unbound, speaking to a British officer and pointing north, toward the direction Mancini's sedan had tried to turn. The scene did not need translation. Her escape, her seal, her urgency had all been a lever to make Mario stall the convoy and expose the marshal's route at the exact moment the roadblock tightened. The result was truth. The cost was that the one thing Mario had called clean now wore another uniform. Sofia looked at him once. Her face held no triumph, only exhaustion. She pointed again, not at him, but at the gap in the road where scattered Italians still fled. The gesture said his sacrifice was still useful, even if his hope was not. Mario tore off his collar tabs and dropped them into the sand, watching wind begin to cover the cloth. The result was a private refusal of the story others would write for him. The cost was that, without insignia, he became only a body to be counted. British soldiers approached with rifles low. Mario did not resist. He sat on the scorched edge of his tank hull and watched the desert sunset bleed into flat distance, indifferent to flags. In the temporary enclosure that formed by night, a clerk wrote his name and rank, assigned him a number, and moved on without pause. The result was reduction to ink. The cost was that intent vanished, leaving only outcome. In the days that followed, Mario heard scraps of news pass through the cages, that whole formations had surrendered, that the headquarters in Africa would change hands again, that the next salvation would come from allies who spoke German. None of those scraps returned Sofia to him, and none restored the men he had left walking in the dark near Antalat. The result was a future shrinking into endurance. The cost was that endurance demanded silence. Weeks later, men in the camp whispered about a brigadier who had turned north when everyone else fled south, who had blocked a marshal's convoy and bought minutes while shells fell. Some versions killed him, others made him larger than he had ever been. Mario heard the stories and recognized that legends were a form of rationing, a way to keep shame from eating men alive. The result was a myth that soothed. The cost was that myth could never carry the one name that mattered. The woman who had remembered him long enough to use him, and perhaps long enough years later to feel the weight of that use.